introducing Wanjiku Croy. So Wanjiku was born in the Rift Valley, in a hospital called Molo Hospital. And this is about the earliest photo that we could find of her. As you can imagine, cameras weren't necessarily readily available at that time. And this seems to be the only one in existence. I barely recognize her myself, to be honest. Yeah, and then on to the next slide. Should be one before, hopefully.
Yes.
Did I jump one? No, the version I have is the next one.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, when Jiku spent her sort of initial years living mostly with her grandmother, Helen, who you can see pictured on sort of the right-hand side, and that little person in the middle is Wanjiku. So when Jiku spent more time with her grandmother, she sort of gravitated towards her, feeling a little bit more connected than she did with her mother. And so every day, sort of after school, she would go there and sort of at home. To give you a bit of context, Mum was or is the eldest of 6 siblings, and although she didn't necessarily know it at the time, she was the only one to be fathered by someone different. So I think that was something that was more of an elephant in the room rather than acknowledged or spoken about openly. Next slide.
Okay.
And also with a sort of a bit of context in culture, you being the eldest, you always get a little bit more responsibility to kind of lead the way, especially to show a good example for your siblings. And that's something that Wanjiku always took very seriously. Okay, so that was the photo. It's just been switched around. So if you could go on to the next photo, please. Yeah, so this is Wanjiku just before she heads off to Mombasa. So she's kind of towards the end of her school years now, and this is where she's starting to have acting as part of her DNA. It's something that was a huge passion for her when she was in Mombasa, which is where she went to do some further education, and continued to be a big part of her life throughout the various jobs that she had. To give you guys a bit of context, Mombasa's at least sort of 8 hours away from the city centre or the main city, Nairobi. So at that time, it was a considerable sort of distance to travel and try and build a life out there. If you go on to the next photo.
Okay.
So, I mean, once you move, it's not like as though she didn't come back, but this is another photo that we found of Wanjiku's mother and Duta. And she would come back infrequently or invariably to come back and sort of spend time with her. Her mother is an extremely hard worker and still works the farmland that she lives on today. So if you were to visit her today, you would still find her sort of tending to the goats and the chickens, as well as gathering all the crop, and that's always stayed with her. On to the next slide.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, yeah, next slide again. I'll share the finished presentation, which has a much better flow than the initial one that we sent through. So apologies again. The next one should, yeah, excellent. So now this is Mum living in Mombasa. She's obviously grown up and she's now a young adult. This is when I guess technology was really sort of coming into Kenya in its entirety. So Mum was fortunate enough to be part of an IT company working on some quite new initiatives. I think initially she was a software consultant for a shipping company where she worked on certain software to help with the processing of those shipments. Computing was something that's always interested her and stayed with her all throughout her sort of adult life and into her time in the UK. But certainly she did have a little bit of a surprise while she was in Mombasa that definitely changed the course of her, or the direction of her life that she didn't necessarily expect. So if you go on to the next slide.
Okay.
Onto the next. Yeah. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So the surprise was me. And I think, as we've kind of heard other people describing, having children isn't always something you necessarily plan from the beginning. But when it happens, it's a decision that I know I've always remembered Mum sort of telling me that it was a decision that she consciously made to commit her entire soul and being and sort of physical space to, and everything that she would do, she would give absolutely everything to giving me the best opportunities that I could possibly have in life, and work hard to doing that. So at the time, as you can imagine, she had a son from a white man who was born out of wedlock, and also was quite early in her life. So there was a lot of challenges and a lot of reasons as to why you might not want to be proud of that. But despite that, she was determined. On to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so this just shows, I thought it was a good one to show Mum's commitment. And then if you go on to the next one.
Okay. Okay, so.
Okay, Mum's wedding day. So Mum got married soon after I was born, and got married to my father. And I think, just to give you some context, this was a period of time which was a place of opportunity. I think, you know, she'd had an unexpected new direction and wanted to try and give that the best chance it could, and felt that lived in the UK, and she would have a lot more place to sort of further her career and give her child some opportunities there. On to the next slide.
Okay.
I've kind of wanted to sort of go quickly through that initial part, although it's important and it's good to give a bit of context as to who Mum is. Judging by the flavour of this kind of conference, I guess one of the real defining moments for Mum, good or bad, is her developing lupus and the effect that kind of had on her life afterwards. So to just describe that a little bit, for her, for Wanjiku, singles came first. That meant an immediate change to sort of Wanjiku's capacity to do the normal things that she was doing. Normally, she'd be working 5 days a week. She had, as Gertrude mentioned, lots of initiatives that she was a part of, projects all over the place. One of which we'll go into in a second is sort of a women's listening events that she was organising in Kenya. Still based in the UK, so you can imagine the time difference. I would always remember, even way before we are now connecting on Zoom as a norm, that I would go to bed and wake up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock to go to the toilet and find Mum talking to someone halfway across the world. So that was just a normal part of life for us. But really, the change in lupus had to her meant that she was completely bedridden for a while. So if any of you that haven't had it, it's an autoimmune disease. For her, for Mum specifically, affected her left foot, which meant that she wasn't able to walk as far or do activities for as long as she previously was. That didn't necessarily change Mum's outlook or disposition. That just meant she had to manage it, and she had to do a little bit less in smaller chunks. And the experience that then I had as a result of that is a very normal childhood. And I think at the time you just think, oh, well, Mum's just, you know, normal. She's the same. She's obviously in a bit more pain. But that's it, really. I didn't really feel a huge or significant change or a loss. And I think that's a testament to her resilience and determination there. Something I can only really appreciate now. So I've gone to the next slide, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So this is a picture of one of these the events that Mum was a part of, and something that you can't necessarily see in this photo is the crutch that she was using often to sort of stay on her feet for long periods of time. But really, what I'm trying to show here is it was almost like a pausing or a slowing down of Mum's efforts rather than a stopping of it. And she still had the same determination to keep up the same cadence that she'd had previously. if not really needing to take more of a step back. So if you go on to the next slide, please.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So this is Mum continuing on with her work, believing in capacity to change. But the project that I think holds most dear to Mum is the Mau Mau case. And I'll explain a little bit about that in the next slide if we move on to that.
Okay.
So very briefly, and I'm not doing it justice whatsoever, so apologies in advance, but to give you context, the Mau Mau was a fight for independence against the British. And obviously lots of people from Kenya were involved in that in varying amounts. But the point of this case was for the UK or the British to acknowledge the hurt and the pain and ultimately the deaths that were at the British hands. And the goal was of the court case for an apology, a formal apology to be sought and to be given by the British government, but also reparations to be given out to all of the key members that were involved within the Mau Mau and obviously lost the greatest. I'm pleased to say that Mum was instrumental and key in this and got the right success. She got the apology and the people got some payments out. I don't know the exact figure now. But I guess the sad or the other side to the coin of this, if we go on to the next slide, is that at the time of the court case and at the time of these pictures being taken, especially, the one on the left, this is when Wanjiku suffered her stroke. Part of lupus is that being an autoimmune disease, she was susceptible to the common cold and that having a detrimental effect. And in Mum's case, that did occur. In a very active lifestyle, she was moving around all over the place, and it was a trip to America while she was trying to find some more holistic treatments towards her recovery that she kind of fell ill and unfortunately suffered a stroke. It was during this stroke in 2012, whilst the Olympics were on, that Mum was in hospital. But what I'd really like to, if we move on to I think that might be on to the next slide.
Okay.
So yeah, when Jiku woke up from the stroke with her life intact, but having lost so much, initially she discovered she couldn't speak, or she could speak, but not in a way that she'd been used to. She couldn't formulate many words, but also didn't have the knowledge to do the basic tasks that she was very much comfortable for doing, like brushing her teeth. These are all things that she definitely had to relearn and learn again. So, I mean, you could loosely describe this as starting again when Jiku had to learn almost all aspects of her life, and all whilst trying to do that with one less arm. Her arm on her right side is much more responsive now than it used to be, but at the time was largely redundant. So you can imagine that this was an extremely scary position to be in. I think mentally in her head, not much had necessarily changed, but the effects she could see immediately as she tried to do anything like pick up something or talk. So as well as that, unfortunately, because she was in hospital or intensive care for such a long period of time, Mum also found that she had been robbed of a lot of her life's achievements. So crucially, financially, she had gone from being in quite a financially strong position to one of real weakness, and finding that she's now or had a lot of problems that she's now overcome. She was robbed of her dignity, physically and emotionally, but also things like land that she owned, and she also then got ensued into a court case. All this culminated in really just a difficult time for her. But the message now is that I think that Mum was looking to try and get across is that with each of these life events, they're always just a moment in time. And for Wanjiku, Mum has had to sort of rebuild from a place that she never expected to, and is continuing to rebuild, but I think is enjoying that journey more and more now, and more than she ever has. and she's also humbled and really grateful to be a part of a community and a group such as yourselves. And I think is looking forward to being able to having an opportunity to achieve the many goals that she had on her list previously and the ones that she's been adding now. So I guess, yeah, the final slide I had, but that you can't see, is really change is inevitable, guys. Question is, how will that change when Wanjiku's experience shape her new direction? So stay tuned. I hope that was useful in some way. And thank you very much for listening.